Good morning, children. Sai Ram, and welcome back once again. So, children, in this video, we will continue with the history chapter number 4, that is pastoralist in the modern world, and this is part 3rd. So, children, in previous video, we have discussed important pastoral communities of India and how the lives of the Indian pastoralists have changed dramatically over the colonial and post-colonial periods. Now, in this video, in this session, we are going to discuss about pastoralism in Africa. Okay, so let us move to the Africa. In Africa, where over half the world's pastoral population lives, even today, over 22 million Africans depend on some form of pastoral activity for their livelihood. Actually, they include communities like Bedouins, Berbers, Maasai, Somali, Boran, and Turkana, right? All these communities, they lived in Africa. Now, most of them now live in the semi-arid grasslands or arid deserts where rain-fed agriculture is difficult. Okay, now most of them, they live in the semi-arid grasslands and arid deserts where rain-fed agriculture is difficult. And most of them, they raise cattle, camels, goats, sheep, and donkeys. So, they sell milk, meat, animal skin, and wool. Some also earn through trade and transport. That means some of them involve in trade and transport also. So, some of them they just earn through trade and transport. Others combine pastoral activities with agriculture. Still others do a variety of odd jobs to supplement their meager and uncertain earnings from pastoralism. So children, like pastoralists in India, the lives of African pastoralists have changed dramatically over the colonial and post-colonial periods. Now, what have these changes been? So, we will discuss some of these changes by looking at one pastoral community of Africa, the Maasai community. So, the Maasai community. First of all, the Maasai cattle herders live primarily in East Africa. Okay, the Maasai cattle herders, they live primarily in East Africa. 3 lakh in southern Kenya. Around 3 lakh Maasai, they just live in southern Kenya, and another 1,50,000 they live in Tanzania. So there are so many new laws and regulations took away their land and restricted their movement, and this affected their lives in times of drought and even reshaped their social relationships. Okay, so let's first understand the word Maasai. So first of all, the word Maasai is derived from the word Ma. Maasai means my people. Okay, Maasai means my people, and this word is derived from the word Ma. And as I told you, like about 3 lakh Maasai, they lived in southern Kenya, and another, that means 1,50,000, they lived in Tanzania. Okay, so now let's learn where have the grazing lands gone during the colonial period or over the colonial period. So first, territorial positions in Africa. One of the problems that Maasai have faced is the continuous loss of their grazing lands. Actually, in Africa before colonial times, the Maasai land stretched over a vast area from North Kenya to the steppes of North Tanzania. But in the late 19th century, European imperial powers scrambled for territorial positions in Africa. Actually, they're slicing up the region into different colonies. In 1885, Masai land was cut into half within an international boundary between British Kenya and German Tanganyika. Okay, so in 1885, Masai land was cut into the half. Okay, now subsequently the best grazing lands were gradually taken over for white settlement, and the Masai were pushed into a small areas. In South Kenya, it's Kenya, and North Tanzania. So the Masai lost about around 60% of their pre-colonial lands. They were confined to an arid zone with uncertain rainfall and poor pastures. Okay, now from the late 19th century, the British government in East Africa, they also encouraged local peasant communities to expand cultivation. Children, in previous video we have discussed about when we discussed about the Indian pastoral communities. So under the colonial government, they also encouraged local peasants of India to expand cultivation, right? So as cultivation expanded, pastures land were turned into the cultivated fields, right? But in the if we talk about the pre-colonial times, the Masai pastoralists had dominated their agriculture neighbors, both economically and politically. But by the end of colonial rule, the situation had reversed. Now, establishment of game reserves. Actually, the large areas of grazing land were also turned into the game reserves. First thing is, some of the grazing lands they just turned into the cultivated fields, and some of the large areas of grazing land they were also turned into the game reserves, like first, Masai and Samburu National Park in Kenya, and next we have Serengeti Park in Tanzania. Okay, both are the grazing lands, but these grazing lands they were turned into the game reserves. Pastoralists were not allowed to enter in these reserves. They could neither hunt animals nor graze their herds in these areas. But very often, these reserves were in areas that had traditionally been regular grazing grounds for Masai herds. The Serengeti National Park in Tanzania, for instance, was created 14,760 kilometers of Masai grazing land. The loss of financed grazing lands and water resources created pressure on the small area of land that the Masai were confined within. And continuous grazing within a small area meant a spoil of the quality of pastures. Even fodder was always in short supply. Feeding the cattle became a persistent problem. Now, the next is the borders are closed. That means in the 19th century, African pastoralists they could move over vast areas in search of pastures, like pre-colonial period. When the pastures were exhausted in one place, so they moved to a different area to graze their cattle. But from the late 19th century, okay, late 19th century, the colonial government began imposing various restrictions on their mobility on their movement. So, like the Maasai, other pastoral groups were also forced to live within the confines of special reserves. Actually, the boundaries of these reserves became the limits within which they could not now move, and they were not allowed to move out with their stock without special permits. And it was difficult to get permits without trouble and harassment. So, those found guilty of disobeying the rules, they were severely punished. Actually, these pastoralists they were also not allowed to enter the markets in white areas. Actually, in many regions, they were prohibited from participating in any form of trade. White settlers and European colonists, they saw these pastoralists as dangerous people with whom all contact had to be minimized. Cutting off all links was, however, never really possible because white colonists had to depend on black labor to bore mines and build roads and towns. The new territorial boundaries and restrictions imposed on them suddenly changed the lives of pastoralists, and this adversely affected both their pastoral and trading activities. Earlier pastoralists they were not only looked after animal herds but traded in various products. The restrictions under colonial rule did not entirely stop their trading activities, but they were now subject to various restrictions. Now, the next we have when pastures dry. So basically, drought affects the life of pastoralists everywhere. When rains fail and pastures are dry, cattle are likely to starve unless they can be moved to areas where forage is available. That is why traditionally pastoralists are nomadic. Okay, they move from place to place, and this nomadism allow them to survive bad times and avoid crisis. But from the colonial period, the Maasai were bound down to a fixed area, confined within a reserve, and prohibited from moving in search of pastures. They were cut off from the best grazing lands and forced to live within a semi arid tract prone to frequent droughts. Since they could not shift their cattle to places where pastures were available, large number of Maasai cattle died of starvation and disease in these areas in these years of drought. Basically, an inquiry in 1930 showed that the Maasai in Kenya 7,20,000 cattle, 8,20,000 sheep, and 1,71,000 donkeys in just 2 years of severe drought. 1933 and 1934, over half the cattle in Maasai Reserve died. So, as the area of grazing land shrank, the adverse effect of the droughts increased in intensity. The frequent bad years led to a steady decline of the animal stock of the pastoralist. So, is it clear how the lives of African pastoralists changed under the colonial government or under the colonial? Now, the next topic is not all were equally affected. Actually, in Maasai land, as as elsewhere in Africa, not all pastoralists were equally affected by the changes in the colonial period. If you talk about the Maasai peoples, so in pre-colonial times, Maasai society was divided into two social categories. First, elders, and the second, warriors. Okay, so here we talk about in the pre-colonial times. At that time, Maasai society was divided into two social categories, elders and warriors. So first, elders. Elders, they just formed the ruling group. They met in periodic councils to decide on the affairs of the community. And these elders, they also settled disputes. Clear? First, the elders, they formed the ruling group. They also met in periodic councils to decide on the affairs of the community, and they also settled disputes. Next, we have the warriors. So, warriors consisted of younger people, mainly responsible for the protection of the tribe, right? These warriors, they were responsible for the protection of the tribe. They defended the community and organized cattle raids. Actually, at that time, in the pre-colonial time, raiding was important in society where cattle was wealth, and it is through raids that the power of different pastoral groups was assisted. Young men came to be recognized as members of the warrior class when they proved their main lines by raiding the cattle of other pastoral groups and participating in wars. They, however, were subject to the authority of the elders. Now, to administer the affairs of the Maasai, the Britishers introduced a series of measures that had important implications. First, Britishers, they appointed chief of different subgroups of Maasai. Okay, so the Britishers, they appointed chief of different subgroups of Maasai, who were made responsible for the affairs. Okay, they were responsible for the affairs of the tribe. The British imposed various restrictions on raiding and warfare. Consequently, the traditional authority of both elders and warriors was adversely affected under the colonial rule. The chief, appointed by the colonial government, often accumulated wealth over time. Actually, they had a regular income with which they could buy animals, goods, and land. Actually, they lent money to poor neighbor also, who needed cash to pay taxes. And many of them, they just began living in towns and became involved in trade. Their wives and children, they stayed back in the villages to look after the animals. And these chiefs managed to survive the devastation of war and drought. They had both pastoral and non-pastoral income and could buy animals when their stock was depleted. But the life history of poor pastoralists who depended on their livestock was different. Most often, they did not have the resources to tide over bad times. And in times of war and famine, they lost nearly everything. They had to go looking for the work in the town. Some out living as charcoal burners, others did odd jobs. And the lucky could get more regular work in road or building construction. So basically, the social changes in Maasai society occurred at two levels under the colonial government. Firstly, the traditional difference based on age between the elders and warriors was disturbed, though it did not break down entirely. And secondly, a new distinctions between the wealthy and poor pastoralists developed. So, children, we see that pastoral communities in different parts of the world are affected in a variety of different ways by changes in the modern world. Many new laws, new borders affect the patterns of their movement. With increasing restrictions on their mobility, pastoralists find it difficult to move in search of pastures. As pastures land disappear, grazing becomes a problem, while pastures that remain small through continuous overgrazing. Times of drought become times of crisis, and when cattle die in large numbers. Yet pastoralists do adapt to new times. They change the path of their annual movement. Even they reduce their cattle numbers, exert political pressure on the government for relief, subsidy, and other forms of support, and demand a right in the management of forest and water resources. Even many environmentalists and economists have increasingly come to recognize that pastoral nomadism is a form of life that is perfectly suited to many hilly and dry regions of the world. So, children, here we have completed this chapter. So, that's it for this part. Thank you. Have a nice day and keep learning.